I have to tell you, we have a special treat for you for our presenter today. I wish I could claim the responsibility for having discovered her, but that would be dishonest of me. So the credit goes to Rachel and Cherie, who probably about a year and a half ago saw Ann Colby here at the Crescent City Women's Club, and they both told me, you have to get Ann Colby. And so here she is. Ann grew up in Orlando and attended UF for her bachelor's and law school degree. After serving local government for 42 years, she retired in 2016 with her husband, Bill McLeod, to St. Augustine. He is with her today. Thank you for coming. She then began research for Wicked St. Augustine, which was published by the History Press in 2020. She spends her time doing historical research and conducting evening tours of Spyglass Travel Company. Now, Wicked St. Augustine spotlights that part of St. Augustine not on the standard tourist maps, the bordellos, speakeasies, casinos, and the occasional opium den, and will introduce you to the people who have both run those vices and enjoyed them for centuries. The book, and I just purchased mine, will be available after Ann's talk. And should you be interested, cash $20, credit card $23.99. I have had a chance to get into the book earlier. I had borrowed Cherie's. I didn't have a chance to complete it, but I can tell you this about her writing style is that it's smooth, clean, readable, and very entertaining. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann Colby.
Well, thank you. Okay, when I first talked about doing this, I knew that I was going to have a lot of repeat visitors to hear what I had to say, having spoken with the Women's Club. And so I asked him, well, can you give me an idea of what you all might like to hear about? Because, well, St. Augustine's wicked history goes through, well, about 5 centuries. So we've got a lot to cover. In fact, I was just giving you the history lesson, we'd be here for about 5 hours, which is how long some of my tours end up lasting, because they really want to hear everything there is to hear about these things in St. Augustine. So he suggested that I concentrate on simply the most scandalous things that ever happened in St. Augustine. Of course, that's kind of hard to do when you're talking about local government because, well, there's a lot of scandalous things that go on in local governments. But I think what I will do, unless later on you want to ask questions about things earlier, rather than start at the beginning of the vice industries was 1565 in St. Augustine, September 8th to be particular. We know what day they all started. And kind of move ahead in history to the Flagler era and Prohibition, which is really when we've shown in our history with wicked things, particularly prostitution, gambling, and bootlegging. And I'll try and cover a little bit of all three. Well, let's see. Mr. Flagler gets here in 1881. His hotels are built by 1885, opened in 1888. I probably could just do with the history of Mr. Flagler and get in the most scandalous things that ever happened in St. Augustine, because Mr. Flagler was responsible for a lot of them. I know you take the history tours of St. Augustine and they tell you what a great man he was. And is anybody here related to Henry Flagler? Just want to make sure. I'm probably not going into the happy history of Henry Flagler, the one they tell you on the history tours. He was a great man. Oh, he did so much for our architecture and our business, and that's in fact, he did. But he is also singularly responsible for some of the worst business scandals in St. Augustine. He is singularly responsible for segregation in St. Augustine, which, as many of you probably know, we did not let go of very quickly. It began in 1881 with Mr. Flagler, not in the Civil War, not during the era of slavery. We were not a segregated town. But thanks to Mr. Flagler's ideas about society and who should associate with whom in society, he decided in 1881 that from henceforward, St. Augustine will be strictly segregated, and from that time forward, it was. So we can thank him for that. We can also thank him for many of the marital scandals that went through St. Augustine. Have any of you ever heard about his 3 wives? Yes. Well, the first one was perfectly respectable and died young. The second one, ultimately, well, he needed to replace her to get wife number 3. So he has problems there because they don't allow divorce in Florida, and the wife is still living upstairs. He's already had an illegitimate child with wife number 3. So when he finally decides to do something, he has to pay off the legislature of Florida to the tune of $15,000 per person to pass. Oh yes, yeah, these are the wonderful things about Henry Flagler. So he pays off the state legislature to pass a 1-day exception to Florida divorce laws, allowing him to divorce his second wife, Ada Alice. And then he has to have grounds for the divorce, which of course cannot reflect badly on Henry. So he chooses the only one available, and that is insanity of the wife. He has his 3 doctors declare Ada Alice to be insane, and there's many disputes in history as to whether that was actually true. But in any event, he has her hauled off to upstate New York to be placed in an asylum where she stays the rest of her life, which is up into the 1930s, I might add, when she dies a very wealthy woman. So what? She dies a very wealthy woman. So once he's free of wife number 2, he immediately marries wife number 3, also a very young woman, very elegant. She's been groomed by Henry since she was quite young, and so he marries her. She's perfect. She knows exactly what to do because she has been groomed by Henry for years. However, their very happy marriage only lasts 3 years. Henry then falls down, very mysteriously, the stairs of his home in Palm Beach and breaks his hip and dies.
Wow.
And this wife is now, Mary Lily, is now left with the widow's portion of the estate. Not the main part of the estate. That is left to this mysterious child who is actually their illegitimate daughter, and becomes known as Henry Flagler's favorite niece. Little Louise, a toddler at this time, is now left with the massive estate of Henry Flagler. Now, Mary Lily enjoys her freedom as free of Henry for 3 years, and then she dies of a morphine overdose. Oh, yes. It took a lot to be, affiliated with Henry Flagler. You have a lot to put up with. And of course, it's not at all hurt by the fact that we have a very popular, opium den here in St. Augustine, right on the plaza. The building is still there today. It's right on the corner of Cathedral Place and the Avenida de Mendez. It sells macaroons, French macaroons. But in the day, it had lovely rooms, private rooms with chaise lounges where the ladies, the very respectable ladies of St. Augustine, could enjoy their choice of heroin, morphine, cocaine, or opium, all provided by the best and most well-known pharmaceutical company in the United States, Bayer. Oh, yes. Bayer actually invented cocaine. They first developed cocaine here in the United States as the antidote to cocaine addiction. Yes, well, that's how they thought back in those days. And those particular medications were the prominent medications used to cure that disease that afflicted all women at the time. Hysteria. We were all afflicted with it. A little trip down to the plaza, a few hours in the opium den, and you're fine. You're no longer, hysterical. And so she dies of a morphine overdose. And little Louise over here, who inherits all that fortune, 20 years old, she dies of a morphine overdose. That's what comes of being a female in Henry Flagler's family. Now, Henry Flagler, of course, was the one who talked St. Augustine into passing the first regulation of gambling, alcohol, and prostitution. We had no laws governing those activities, not from 1565 until 1881. 1881 is when Henry Flagler comes, and of course, he's a Presbyterian. So he says, well, we have to do something about this. It's obviously immoral, and this is going to be the family destination of the South. Excuse me. So we have to immediately pass all those laws in 1881 saying that these things are all illegal. Gambling, prostitution, running a brothel, drinking, absolutely, drinking or making alcohol, all illegal, according to the city. And then about 5 minutes after they passed those laws, they decided never, ever to enforce them. And they still don't. Well, unless you're driving a car, I wouldn't, don't drive and consume alcohol at the same time. But other than that, you will never see in the St. Augustine record, the arrests for prostitution or gambling or for most alcohol. It's only DUI. So we pretty much adhered to that. And I must say there was one exception to that. And Henry absolutely insisted on this exception being enforced. And that was women could not consume alcohol. Oh no, we all know what will happen to society if women become addicted to alcohol. So that was enforced. You get caught with a drink, a beer, and you are going to do in a week in the county jail, no matter how respectable you are. On the other hand, a little opium, a little morphine, it makes for a calmer wife. So Henry decides all of this is actually very good, because he knew with his business of bringing the very wealthy here to St. Augustine to spend the winter, that these men were not going to spend the winter playing bridge with their wives sitting on the patio at the Ponce de Leon Hotel. No, they wanted the same entertainment that they had in Boston and New York and Philadelphia. Here, they were able to get it without fear of being arrested. So there was no scandal to it, not at all. So Henry builds his hotels and is very happy that he's able to install entertainments in those hotels, not in the Ponce de Leon. That's where the wives and kids stayed. So no, it's not there. But over in the what's now the Hotel Alcazar, which is Leitner Museum now. Oh, everything was there. That was Party City. They had casinos. They had God knows how many places you could drink. They had a gymnasium. They had a spa. All of this is for men, of course, not for the women. And they had their marble pool and everything, just perfect for entertainment, except for one thing. After the first year, Henry got a lot of complaints about his guests, from his guests at the Alcazar. Oh no, Henry, you're going to have to make some big changes to this building. So he shuts it down and he adds a fourth floor. And if you look at the building today, you'll see that right in the center, not on the wings are still 3 stories, but the very center of the building, all the way around in a big rectangle, it's now 4 flights rather than 3. The rooms on the 4th floor were the only rooms in the Flagler complex that rented not by the season, meaning from December 25th until April 30th, but by the hour. That became the brothel for Henry Flagler's establishment. They were very upset that they were having to walk half a block to the nearest brothel from the Flagler Hotel. You know, it's half a block down Granada Street. Granada Street. It's half a block down, and they were not happy about that. We have to go out in the weather. You know, it could be hot, it could be raining, and oh no, Henry, you've got to have one-stop shopping. So that was a thriving brothel, and of course, down the street on Granada Street was the largest and most expensive brothel in St. Augustine. Unfortunately, you can't see it today because it's now a vacant lot. But it's interesting that the one area of St. Augustine that was never segregated was the sex trade. Of course not. You know, we're not going to regulate it that much. And so we had black madams who worked in the white section of St. Augustine. We had white madams that worked in the black section of St. Augustine. And we had girls of every color and every race working in all of the brothels. Now, the expensive brothel, and by the way, if you want to know how I found out about all of this, yeah. Well, from the elderly men of St. Augustine, who were more than happy to talk to me about their memories of which were the really good brothels in St. Augustine. And I might add, their wives were sitting right next to them when they were talking to me about these things. Surprisingly, the society matrons of St. Augustine did not mind in the least. They were proud of our city brothels because our city brothels were, they were safe, they were healthy, And their husbands would go be happily entertained and come home very, very happy. And guess what? The wives were not going to have to exert any efforts to entertain them. They still had all the privileges of being a wife, but none of the burdens of having to keep them happy. Just send them off to their favorite brothel. Anyway, it sounds kind of odd, but you know, back in those days, marriage was more of a contract than it was done for love, or they didn't do it for love or affection. They did it mostly as a contract, a business contract, if you will. And so this whole situation kind of makes sense. But St. Augustine, unlike many major cities, we didn't put brothels on the back streets. We didn't try to hide them. They were very much a part of our culture, and an important part, because they were such a financial asset to the city of St. Augustine, and always had been. But back to the most expensive brothel. O.C. Martin was the madam of that particular brothel. It was a brothel that specialized in mixed race girls. She recruited them all from New York. Every year she'd do a recruitment trip. And the girls were considered to be the best trained, most sophisticated girls in all of St. Augustine, which is why they commanded the prices that O.C. Martin charged for them, which in 1900, if you planned to go to that brothel and purchase some time with the girls, the least amount of time you could purchase was 5 minutes. Apparently, that's all it took. 5 minutes in 1900 was going to cost you $100.
Nice. Really? That's
That's high end.
That's high end.
The girls were not the only entertainment at this particular brothel. It had a great restaurant. I found many ads for the restaurant in the St. Augustine newspapers. It was well thought of. And it also contained a music club. And that was one of the music clubs on the Chitlin Circuit. Everybody know what the Chitlin Circuit is? No. Well, during the days of segregation, it was illegal for a Black musician to play in a white-owned club. O.C. Martin was Black. So her club, her music club, nightclub, really, was on the Chitlin Circuit. And it was, so who got the best musicians of the day? People like Louis Armstrong, Bessie Smith, Jelly Roll Morton, Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, and of course, those two young men who started their careers there, Ray Charles and Little Richard. So it was a very popular music club, as well as a restaurant, as well as a brothel. So it truly was all entertainment in one place, and made a lot of money, and did very well, and was very, very popular during the day until it finally closed about late 1930s. So we also had just down the street, we had two more large brothels that were on Sanford Street, right across the street from each other on Sanford Street. And they were owned and operated by one of our families, one of our management couples in the brothel trade. Jack and Margaret Darling were their names. And those two brothels are still standing. One looks like a Victorian Gothic house, and the other one is a Southern plantation. And yeah, and now they're very nicely redone single family homes, I'm sure. O.C. Martin had two more brothels, one just down the street, right off Washington Street, and another one just outside of town, right past the Sentinels, the city gate Sentinels. And that one was specifically for the railroad men. That, oh yeah, well, she has prices for everybody. Now, it might also be important to point out that Charlotte Street, right close to the bay, was all brothels. North and south of the plaza, it was all brothels, and most of those buildings are still standing. But none of these places are the main red light district of St. Augustine. That was founded by a very singularly important woman, I think, in St. Augustine's history. And her name was Blanche Travis Altavilla. She got off the train here in 1880. She was 20 years old. She is the one that eventually controlled all the brothels in St. Augustine. You can't actually read through the property records without seeing her name on every page 2 or 3 times, because she ended up buying property. She ended up purchasing property from other madams, and she ended up being the one-woman bank of St. Augustine for the madams in town. She actually ended up loaning them money if they needed to improve themselves, and needed to improve the properties, needed to buy more property. She would loan them the money, and then they would give her back the paper on the property, and that's how she got control of those properties, and ended up owning more land than, by the time of her death, which was in 1953, she owned more land in St. Augustine than anybody else, including the Catholic Church, I might add. Yes, but she was a remarkable woman, a foresighted woman. Because when she took over the brothels, she made changes. First change, she installed indoor plumbing in all the brothels. She had indoor plumbing and ensuite bathrooms before Henry Flagler had them in the Ponce de Leon Hotel. Very forward thinking. The second thing that she did was give the girls full-time health care. Yeah, who does that? Who does that anymore? Full-time health care. And that not only meant health of the girls, but also the health of the clients. She had doctors on staff to do inspections at all times in every brothel. So you made sure these were healthy brothels. You were not going to come back with a disease or an illegitimate child. Hey, that's one of the reasons the wives approved. Seriously. The other thing she did was make sure that every brothel in St. Augustine had full-time security. There was going to be no stabbing, no rolling, no raping, no murdering. Of course, the brothels were still going to get as much money from you as they could. That's their job. But it was going to be legitimate and not through some kind of crime that it was done. Now, all of the security was provided, of course, by the St. Johns County Sheriff's Department and the police department for the city of St. Augustine. An interesting story about that that probably is reflected it has only happened in St. Augustine. In 1942, there was a court case in St. Augustine. The mayor of St. Augustine fired the chief of police and the deputy chief of police. Oh, yes. Why? They were taking kickbacks from the brothels to the tune of $6 per girl per week, plus $100 per brothel on Christmas. Kickbacks. Terrible, terrible thing. Well, the police chief and the deputy were not going to take this lying down, so they immediately sued the city for their jobs back. This particular case took up 6 weeks of St. Augustine's time and 6 weeks of coverage in the first section, front page of the St. Augustine record. There's a lot of information out there in the record if you want to look it up. Well, you have to go to their microfiche to find it. In any event, the other important thing that was going on in 1942, it was relegated to the back page with the grocery ads. World War II.
Huh.
Oh no, in St. Augustine, it was much more important to see what the police, the officers, what the city officials, and what the madam said about taking kickbacks than about whatever was happening in Europe. So took up a lot of time. Everybody had to be see what was going on with this case. The upshot of it was they got their jobs back. Full jobs, reinstatement, full back pay, full back benefits. And the reason, were they taking money from the brothels? Of course they were. Because, as the court said, this was merely an administrative transfer of funds between city departments. They declared the brothels of St. Augustine to be such an integral part of city business that they were, in essence, a city department. An illegal activity, now officially a city department. And I don't know that that's ever been retracted. I have no idea. But in any event, that's the way it was left. And one other thing about the relation, how well the brothels did in the eyes of government. If anybody's heard of Storyville, which was the red light district of New Orleans, very famous. And I mean, they had a newspaper. They published everything about what went on in Storyville. But Storyville only lasted for 17 years. They were closed down in 1917 by the Secretary of the Navy as being too dangerous for the soldiers and sailors to be going there. And they were right. Now, when World War I came along, we here have Blanche's area, or red light district area, which is over in West King. And that area had, oh, by the way, it has a name, just like New Orleans has Storyville. Ours is listed and still listed in the zoning records as the St. Augustine Country Club. So, yeah, so you could tell your wife you were going to the country club for the afternoon, and the one thing you weren't going to do was play golf. So the St. Augustine Country Club, well, the head offices, the head officers at Camp Landing knew very well that their soldiers were going to be coming here to the St. Augustine Country Club for their entertainment. So they thought they ought to look very carefully at it, just like they did at Storyville, to see, if this was a safe place. Well, they did. They checked the whole place out and basically decided it would be the equivalent of the USO for the boys at Camp Landing. So they had a full license to get their entertainment at the St. Augustine Country Club, both during World War I and World War II. And there would be often lines of cars stretching from West King all the way back to the Ponce de Leon Hotel, just waiting. Now, there would be a line on the other side during Prohibition years. There was also a line on the other side of the street. Everybody know where the winery is? Okay, it's right where the San Sebastian runs through under the bridge at King Street. Well, if you look at the foot of that land where there's where the bridge is, there are a number of old docks. They're not in great shape now, but back in the day, they were used by our shrimping fleet. Well, when Prohibition came around, they decided that it would be a whole lot better and more lucrative to run liquor from the Caribbean than to actually catch shrimp. So they converted the fleet, and the St. Augustine shrimp fleet would then go down during the day and pick up bottles of bonded liquor from the Caribbean, and then come back and land at those little docks during high tide and disperse all of their liquor to persons in town, in order, of course. The judges first, and then the chief of police, and the mayor, and then the city council members, and so on and so forth. But there would be a line every night during Prohibition waiting to get your liquor. Now, that's just the tip. They brought in, by the way, 6,000 bottles a night without fail. And, that's during Prohibition. So at least 10 years of $6,000 a bottle coming in to St. Augustine. But that's merely the tip of the iceberg. We were one of the major areas of bootlegging in the country during Prohibition. Yeah. How much did we produce? Well, based on the number of stills we had, the gallonage of those stills, and the turnover for liquor, I figured out that we were producing about 200,000 gallons a month in St. Augustine and St. Johns County. Now, that's a lot of liquor. Now, the average price for a gallon of moonshine, and during those days, was $1 a gallon, which makes sense. That was, average for the United States. You know what we got for our booze in St. Augustine? $60 a gallon. That's a big difference in the 1920s. Oh, yes. We got a lot of money for our liquor, and it was considered some of the best in the country. Many of the major bootleggers ran out of St. Augustine. Much of the liquor was going out. Well, we did drink a fair amount here, but a lot of the liquor went out and was sold all up and down the eastern seaboard. It was carried by, there was one young St. Augustine man who really made a name for himself in the liquor business. He formerly owned a yacht building business and sold it to buy 5 ships to run up and down for liquor running to the Caribbean, and then running liquor up and down the coast. He worked out of St. Augustine, And he was very proud of the fact of several things. One, he never broke the law. He developed a system which was copied by almost every other bootlegger or rum runner in the States. And that was, you got all your liquor on your ship, and then when you got where you wanted to go, you stayed just outside the international line. The locals would then take their fishing boats, which were less likely to be stopped, and go and get the cargoes and then bring them back into the cities. That really stopped the police and the Coast Guard from getting a lot of the big movers of liquor. And this young man was the one that invented that system. He was also very proud of the fact that he never dealt with organized crime. Did you ever notice that St. Augustine has never been associated with organized crime? I mean, where's the mob? Where is it? I mean, we know it was in Florida. Long before this time, the Traficante family was working out of Tampa and Miami, but it was never here. Reason for that? We were too well organized. There was absolutely no way for them to come and do business here. Our families that were running the liquor business are still the families that run most of the liquor businesses here. Very important families. Ever heard the name Michler? You seen it? Yeah. And there's a whole lot of other families that were running a lot of liquor out of St. Augustine, perfectly respectable families. Yes.
I'm curious about the kind of liquor they were bringing up, because if they were going down to the Caribbean, that would have been just rum. I don't think they could grow corn or anything down
No,
there.
no, we made whiskey and moonshine. We got rum from and brandy from the Caribbean.
But to make the other liquors, you need to have grain.
No, you don't. No, you don't. And as a matter of fact, what made our liquor so good is because we didn't use grain. We didn't use corn. Corn is a local product, and we use sugar cane. And that was the basis of our whiskey. And go down to the okay, I'm just about done. You go down to the distillery or the city gates distilleries. They offer free samples, and you can try, because they use the same recipes that they used. And frankly, I think they're still charging the equivalent of $60 a gallon. Only in these days, the currency of these days, not those days. So that was a major thing. The other thing that this particular smuggler was proud of was the fact that he never watered down his liquor. His liquor was always straight up, although a lot of the smugglers did cut it with water and then sell, more bottles. No, his liquor was never cut, and that's why his liquor became known as the real McCoy. His name was William McCoy. Oh, yes. William McCoy, famous St. Augustinian. And I know this is all true because long after I had researched it and put all this information together, and it is in the book, I saw it on Mysteries at the Museum. They did exactly the same story using the same pictures. And I thought, how amazing that is. But I'm happy that our local boys are getting a little PR in history these days. Now, there are so many things I could talk about with regard to the madams and how, by the way, open prostitution, open brothels, the kind with the neon signs in the front that say, get your girls here, they did not stop in St. Augustine until about 1966. The last two open brothels were on St. George Street. Yes, and they were both owned by city commissioners. Oh, yeah, yes, yeah. All the people in power in St. Augustine have been involved in the vice industries. And this is throughout history, for 5 centuries of history. And for that reason, and the reason that our brothels, or at least our city, have the equivalent of a city department, although I'm not sure they're licensing anybody these days. I don't know if you can go and get a license for a brothel, because you can't anymore. But that doesn't mean all of that doesn't exist, because it does, including very prominently our official sport, city sport, which is cockfighting. Now, I could go in and tell you in detail about the city history of cockfighting, because it's pretty extensive, but you'll be able to get a bit of it from the book. I think I should
Well done.
break now, and
Do you have any questions for Ann?
believe me, you can ask anything weird. I have.
We don't want you to stop.
I'll just make a comment. I'm a history buff. She did not make this stuff up. It is true.
Yes. And yet, and let me tell you, it was not easy. You had to go, because Henry Flagler, the guy, he specifically suppressed all the information in any of the newspapers and any of the travel guides, anything published. He prohibited that information from getting out into the public, because he was quite certain this was going to be the family destination of the South, and he was as stiff about it as Disney is today. You're not going to hear bad stuff. You're going to hear all the, the happy stuff and all the great things that we do and our people do, but you're not going to be here about the fun stuff that he actually made a big profit off of. You're not going to hear about that. And so that's one of the reasons that made it very difficult to research. You have to go through records. You have to go through property records, census records, old family letters and documents that they've kept locked up in their attic, and their reminiscences of elderly St. Augustinians who are willing to talk to you and very happy to talk to you. Actually, anything else?
In Flagler's book, I think it was it Three Rivers Press, the one about him and the railroad. I don't remember any of that being in there. Have you read that? You know,
Yes.
that wasn't in there, right? The prostitution. I don't think it was in there. That's why you're hooked.
Oh, yeah, because it absolutely.
That's why you
was
need to get the
there.
book.
There were specific brothels dedicated to working with these railroad people. I mean, of course it existed. And no, he did not make it part of his, it wasn't on the tourist brochures. It wasn't even on the railroad brochures. But yes, it was there. And we weren't the only town in Florida that did this. We just did it in a lot in a genteel manner. Ours was very our sin was very regulated, so it stayed safe. And that, I think, is one of the big differences. We never tried to hide it. Never tried to hide it. It was just simply there, and it was part of city living and actually part of the city economy. Our town pretty much existed on the benefits and the financial gain of the vice industries to keep moving. But yet we've been here for 5 centuries and it's kept us funded all along. That's one of the reasons why we lasted 5 centuries. Yes.
Yes, but focus on sexuality today.
Yes.
Was there also an area for which bisexuals can also be entertained?
Mhm.
There was.
Yeah, we had them. They were here. Again, it's not as open as I suppose one would call regular prostitution, but hey, what about this? Blanche, when she died, was the wealthiest person in St. Augustine. Who did she leave her estate to? She didn't have any brothers, sisters, no children. She left it to her gay lawyer, who was absolutely flamboyantly gay. He was one of the Michler brothers,
They don't.
one of the Michler brothers.
Very good.
Yeah,
Any more questions for Ann?
So
sure.
did like the governor not get involved with like prohibition or I mean, some level, did they not look at St. Augustine and say, hey, look what they're doing over here?
Well, the Treasury agents did. You know, the US Treasury agents knew very well what was going on at St. Augustine. And they made regular trips down here to shut down stills. Because so much liquor was coming out of St. Augustine. What did we do? Well, of course, our government made up this whole system of thwarting the Treasury agents so that they thought they were enforcing the law, but they really weren't. It was very organized. A Treasury agent is going to come to town. They, of course, let the sheriff know. The sheriff then looks on his Rolodex and picks out, 5 moonshiners that their time has come to be raided. We have these 200-gallon stills. You know what was the top amount ever seized in a raid in St. Augustine? 2 quarts. 2 quarts of liquor. That was the top. They would let the bootleggers know that they were coming. Our stills were put together so that they were smaller tanks, soldered together with copper wire and tubing. So when the sheriff and the Treasury agents would come out, announce their presence, according to my neighbor who was a deputy sheriff and went on a number of those raids. He said the only ones who were ever arrested were the ones who were too drunk to run. So they go out there, they carefully break up the stills at the soldered joints, carry the stills, put them in a truck, come back, take pictures with the Treasury agents showing, we've done our job. This is great. They take their pictures and go back to Washington. And of course, the sheriff immediately calls the bootlegger and says, you can pick up your equipment now. And they would have it back. It's easy to put together the soldered joints. So they would have it all back and up and running within 24 hours. We had a system.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Really enjoyable, and we had exceeded all expectations. And again, Ann has her book, Wicked St. Augustine, over here now. She's got great quality photographs in the book. I know I saw one of the moonshine still. So that was being crushed, but probably was going to be hooked together shortly afterwards. But anyway, thank you all so much for coming. I think, BJ, do you have any parting comments?
No, I'm good. Just remember that look for the email for potluck and respond, please, so we can get a count. And we'll see you. Have a good Thanksgiving.
All right, very good. Thank you all.